Happy birthday. 10 years ago, your father paid me $1 million to marry you. The contract is over. My husband shouted this in front of all the guests, threw the ring in my face, and walked out of my own party. Everyone froze in shock. I stood there, humiliated, when suddenly my father's old lawyer stood up from the table and said, "Maya Hayden, your father anticipated this. He said that your true inheritance would only come into effect after these words." What my husband did next. The evening was perfect. Simply perfect. I was turning 39, and Lazarus, my husband, had booked the best restaurant in town, the Imperial. The whole hall was filled with white lilies, my favorite flowers. Their heavy, sweet scent mixed with the aroma of fine perfume and the warm wax from hundreds of candles. Everyone was there, our friends, relatives, Lazarus's business partners. About 50 people, at least. The most respected people in the city. I felt like a queen. I sat at the head of the table in my new ivory silk dress, next to my husband. Lazarus spent the evening being the picture of care, adjusting my hair, topping up my champagne, squeezing my hand with a smile. 10 years of marriage. 10 years. For many, that's a lifetime, but for me, it had flown by like a single, happy day. I looked at him, handsome and confident, and thought, this is it, my happiness. Quiet, steady, real. My father would have been proud. He always wanted this for me, a stable, secure life, free from shocks. Across the table sat my cousin Edith. She caught my gaze and gave me an encouraging smile, raising her glass. Edith and I had been close since childhood, like sisters. She had been my only support after my father's death. Nearby, slightly apart, sat Olympia Blackwood, Lazarus's mother. As always, her posture straight, her gaze cold, her hair flawless. She never particularly liked me, but today, even she looked almost satisfied as she surveyed the lavish hall. Waiters silently served the dishes. Conversations flowed, laughter chimed, and someone offered short, warm toasts. I felt a pleasant warmth from the champagne and the attention all around me. Everything was right. Everything was in its place. I was Maya Hayden, wife of Lazarus Blackwood, a respected woman, hostess of this beautiful evening. And then came the moment of the main toast. Lazarus stood. He tapped a knife on his glass, calling for silence. The chatter stopped instantly. All eyes turned to him. He looked stunning in his expensive suit and crisp white shirt. He swept the room with his charming smile, the one that always made my heart skip. "My dear friends, family," he began, his deep, velvety voice filling the hall. "We are gathered here today to celebrate my beautiful wife, my Maya, on her birthday." He paused and looked at me. There was a strange glint in his eyes I had never seen before. But I brushed it off his nerves. 10 years, he continued, his voice growing slightly louder. Exactly 10 years ago, I stood before a crowd like this and promised to love and care for this woman. 10 years I have played my part. The part of a loving husband. Someone in the hall chuckled nervously, thinking it was the start of a joke. I gave a weak smile too, though something inside me tightened unpleasantly. What did he mean, played my part? Lazarus no longer smiled. His face had hardened, almost unrecognizable. For 10 years, I have lived a lie. A lie invented by her late father, the esteemed Evan Hayden. He was a great businessman, wasn't he? Skilled at making profitable deals. And our wedding, Maya, was his best deal. Silence fell, heavy as death. You could hear the candles buzzing. I stared at my husband, and slowly, like in a nightmare, the meaning of his words sank in. My smile froze into a grotesque grimace. He bought me. Lazarus's voice broke into a shout. He no longer looked at me, he addressed the whole room, every guest personally. Your beloved Evan Hayden paid me, a guy from a simple family, $1 million. $1 million to marry his daughter. To provide her with a proper life, status, a place in society. Because he knew that by herself, she was worth nothing. The words hit me like stones. Every syllable bruised my soul. $1 million. A contract? I knew nothing. I couldn't breathe. The air in the room thickened, sticky. I saw the guest's eyes wide with horror, Olympia's face twisted in anger, though she didn't seem surprised at all. Only Edith looked at me with genuine sympathy, her hand pressed to her mouth. 10 years. Lazarus continued, his face red. I endured it for 10 years. Lived with a woman I didn't choose. Smiled when I wanted to run. All for money. But today, the contract ends. Happy birthday, darling. You're free. And I am free. He stepped toward me. I shrank into my chair instinctively. His eyes burned with hatred. True, primal hatred. Happy birthday. 10 years ago, your father paid me $1 million to marry you. The contract is over. He shouted the last words right in my face. The whole room heard. The whole city would know now. And then he did something that shattered me completely. He yanked the wedding ring off his finger. The gold band I had placed on his hand 10 years ago gleamed in the candlelight. Take it, he hissed. Sell it. Add it to your inheritance. And he threw the ring at my face. The small piece of metal struck my cheek sharply. I gasped, more from humiliation than pain. The ring clanged onto a plate and bounced onto the white tablecloth. He turned, pushing past the frozen waiters, and walked toward the exit. The restaurant door slammed behind him. The hall was filled with an absolute, ringing silence. 50 pairs of eyes stared at me, at my burning face, the ring on the table, my trembling hands. No one moved. No one breathed. I was an exhibit in the museum of my own disgrace. Every second of that silence felt like an eternity. I could feel their eyes stripping me bare, digging into my humiliation. Then came the whispers. At first soft, like dry leaves rustling, then growing louder and louder. People glanced at each other, covering their mouths with their hands. Some stood up, eager to leave. My perfect evening, my perfect life, had collapsed in a single minute. I sat frozen, unable to speak. I wanted to sink through the floor, to disappear, to evaporate. And in that moment, when it seemed things couldn't get worse, a figure rose from a table in the far corner of the room. It was Sebastian Waverly, my father's old lawyer. He was over 70, a tall, lean man with completely white hair and piercing eyes. He rarely appeared in public, so I was surprised he had accepted my invitation. He walked slowly across the hall straight toward me. The whispers died down. Everyone froze again, watching him. He approached our table, circled it, and stopped beside me. He didn't look at me with pity like the others. His gaze was serious, focused. He leaned slightly, and his voice carried startlingly clearly through the dead silence. Maya Hayden? I could only nod, unable to tear my eyes from him. Your father foresaw this, he said firmly, without a trace of doubt. He said that your true inheritance would only come into effect after these words. Only after these. A collective sigh, almost a hiss, swept through the room. Everyone who had been about to leave froze in place. What? What inheritance? What does this mean? I looked at Sebastian, at his wrinkled, unreadable face, and understood nothing. My world had just been shattered. My husband had betrayed me in the cruelest way. My life turned out to be a farce. And this old man stood before me, telling me that all of this was just the beginning, that the humiliation I had just endured in front of the entire city wasn't the end, but some pre-planned key to something else. My mind couldn't wrap around it. It was madness. Ignoring everyone else, the lawyer calmly said. I will be expecting you at my office tomorrow. 10 a.m. Don't be late. Then he turned as slowly as he had come and walked toward the exit, straight as a rod, without looking back. His departure seemed to break the spell over everyone. The room erupted with chatter. People no longer whispered, they spoke loudly, openly. Some hurriedly gathered their things, others went to neighboring tables to share their impressions. The party was over. Now the real show had begun. Edith rushed to me. Her face was pale, tears in her eyes. Maya, my God, Maya. Let's get out of here, please. She grabbed my hand. Her fingers were icy. You can't stay here. Come on. I let her lead me. I moved like a doll, my legs numb. We walked through the hall, feeling hundreds of eyes on us. They burned into my back, my neck. I didn't lift my head. I only looked at my shoes stepping on the expensive carpet. Past tables with untouched food, overturned glasses, past the white lilies that suddenly smelled not of celebration, but of funerals. Outside, the night air hit my face, but brought no relief. Edith helped me into her car and got behind the wheel herself. We drove through the city at night. Bright shop windows, streetlights, headlights of oncoming cars, all blurred into one indifferent smear. Quiet music played in the car, but I didn't hear it. Lazarus's shout and his last words still rang in my ears. The contract is over. The house greeted us with an oppressive, echoing silence. The same house Lazarus and I had chosen together. Every vase, every painting on the walls, part of our shared history. A history that, as it turned out, had never existed. Edith made tea, tried to talk, to comfort me, but her words didn't reach me. I sat on the living room couch, staring at a single point. When she left, promising to pick me up in the morning to take me to the lawyer, the silence became unbearable. I went upstairs to our bedroom. His things were where they always were. A suit thrown over a chair. A book on the bedside table. Everything as usual, as if he had just stepped out for a minute and would be back any moment. I went to the wardrobe and opened the doors. His clothes hung in neat rows. I ran my hand over the fabric of his jacket. 10 years. Lies. $1 million. I didn't sleep all night. I just lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, replaying that evening over and over. Every word, every glance. The humiliation burned like fire in my chest. Beneath that fire, like a cold snake, another question stirred. What did the lawyer mean? What inheritance? In the morning, I felt completely shattered. True to her word, Edith came for me. She was quiet and caring, helping me pick out clothes, because I just stood in front of the wardrobe, unable to figure out what to do. Sebastian's office was in an old building in the city center. A heavy oak door, a plaque with worn gold letters. Inside smelled of old paper, leather, and something else, intensely familiar from childhood. The scent of my father's office. Sebastian sat behind a massive desk, cluttered with folders. He lifted his faded eyes to me and gestured to the chair opposite. Coffee? He asked dryly. I shook my head silently. He paused for a moment, studying my face. I felt like an insect under a microscope. Before we get to the matter at hand, he began, his voice as even and emotionless as yesterday, I must fulfill your father's last wish. He pulled open a desk drawer and took out an old, yellowed envelope. In familiar, sweeping handwriting, one word was written on it, Maya. My heart skipped a beat. That was my father's handwriting. He insisted I read this to you at this exact moment. Not before and not after, the lawyer said. He put on his glasses and carefully opened the envelope. He took out a sheet of paper folded into quarters. As he began to read, it felt like my father's voice filled the quiet office. My dear daughter, my Maya. If you're hearing these words, it means what I've both expected and feared all these years has happened. Lazarus has shown his true face. I know you're hurting. I know you feel betrayed and destroyed. Forgive me for this pain. But I had to do it. My fingers dug into the armrests. What? He had to do it? He knew? Sebastian kept reading in the same steady voice. I've watched you, my sweet girl. You've been living in a golden cage I built with my own hands. Comfortable, safe, but still a cage. You were content with your quiet life, your predictable husband. But Haydens aren't made for quiet lives. In our blood runs the will to fight. And you've forgotten that. I couldn't leave you my inheritance while you were still in comfort and under protection. You wouldn't have been able to handle it. You needed to be tested by fire. Tears streamed down my cheeks, not of self-pity, but of bitter, searing outrage. My own father. He had planned it all. My public execution. I knew Lazarus was a weak and greedy man. Sooner or later, his resentment and humiliation over being bought would break through. 10 years was enough. I orchestrated this humiliation, this trial, to burn your old life to ashes. Only by surviving this betrayal, when you have nothing left to lose, can you become the woman strong enough to lead. Strong enough to protect what I've left you. This is not your end, Maya. This is your beginning. The lawyer stopped and folded the letter. He took off his glasses and looked at me. That's all, he said. I sat there, stunned. Lazarus's betrayal faded next to this. My husband had been nothing but a pawn in my father's cruel game. The father I had idolized, who I believed embodied love and care, had sacrificed me, my happiness, my reputation, for some monstrous plan of his own. What inheritance? I forced out, my voice sounding like a stranger's. Sebastian opened the thick folder lying in front of him. Your true inheritance, Maya, is 100% ownership of Hayden Perfumery. I froze. The perfumery. My grandfather's old factory, which my father had kept more out of sentiment than profit. I remembered it from childhood, the smell of essential oils, the giant copper stills, rows of dark bottles in the cool cellar. It was the heart of our family, its history. After my father died, Lazarus had taken over running it. I had never involved myself in the business. As of today, you are its sole and rightful owner, the lawyer continued, turning the page. However, there are conditions. He put his glasses back on. According to the will, the business is currently on the brink of bankruptcy. It is burdened with massive debts. Your father deliberately refrained from intervening in management in recent years. Debts? What debts? I whispered. We're talking millions, he cut in. You have exactly 3 months to make the business profitable. If by the end of that time the perfumery isn't in the black, it will be immediately liquidated and all assets sold at auction to cover the debts. You will be left with nothing. 3 months. Millions in debt. A business I knew absolutely nothing about. This wasn't an inheritance. It was a noose. Another trial dreamed up by my father. He had thrown me into a cage of tigers to see if I'd survive. Sebastian slid several documents and a ring of old keys toward me. Mechanically, I signed where he pointed. I took the keys. They were heavy, cold. The weight of this collapsing world settled on my shoulders. I left his office in a daze. In one hand, my father's letter, in the other, the keys to a ruined business. I went down the old staircase and out into the street. The bright daylight stabbed my eyes. People hurried past, laughing, living their lives. But my life no longer existed. I took a few steps along the sidewalk, trying to figure out what to do next, where to go. And at that moment, a man in a sharp business suit appeared in front of me. Maya Hayden? He asked. I nodded, still not understanding. He handed me a thick envelope. They asked me to deliver this to you. Sign here. Automatically, I took the papers and scrawled something on his clipboard. He nodded and quickly disappeared into the crowd. I looked at the envelope. Official, with an embossed seal. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were several sheets. A lawsuit. A notice of legal action. My eyes skimmed the lines without grasping the legal jargon. Division of assets. Seizure of property. And at the very bottom, in the plaintiff line, I saw a familiar name that made my blood run cold. Plaintiff, Lazarus Blackwood. He had filed suit. Not the day after the breakup, but the very morning I received my inheritance. It was all planned. His speech at the restaurant, my humiliation, and now this. My inheritance wasn't just a ruin. It was bait in a trap. And my husband had just sprung it shut. I stood in the middle of the crowded sidewalk as the world around me vanished. The sound of cars, the voices of passers-by, everything faded into a dull roar. My mind was an absolute, ringing void. Then one single thought sliced through that void, sharp and clear as glass: the perfumery. The keys in my pocket burned against my hip. They were all I had left. The only place I could go. I don't remember how I caught a taxi. I don't remember telling the driver the old address on the outskirts of the industrial district. I only snapped back to reality when the car stopped in front of a familiar 3-story red brick building, Hayden Perfumery. The sign above the entrance, in old-fashioned wrought letters, was faded and dusty. I paid the driver and stepped out. The building looked abandoned. A few windows on the ground floor were broken, the paint on the frames peeling. Once, this place had been the pride of our city, the heart of my grandfather's business, and later my father's. Now it looked like an old man spending his last days forgotten. I approached the heavy oak door and fumbled in my pocket for the keys. My hands shook so badly I barely managed to fit the key in the lock. It turned with a loud, protesting screech. I pushed the door open. A thick, stagnant smell hit me, a mix of lavender, sandalwood, something sharp and citrusy, layered over dust and dampness. I stepped inside, into the dimness of the enormous workshop. Sunlight filtered through the grimy windows near the ceiling, catching the outlines of huge copper stills, like giant oriental vessels. Shelves lined the walls with rows of dark glass bottles. The silence was so deep I could hear my own heartbeat. I walked further in, my steps echoing through the empty space. Everything reminded me of my father. There was the table where he spent hours blending essences. His old leather apron hung on a hook. Everything was as he had left it. But life was gone. Lazarus had killed this place. I pulled out my phone and dialed the only number I could. Edith? My voice came out hoarse. Maya, where are you? I've been calling everywhere. Her voice was full of worry. I'm at the factory. Alone? Why did you go there? Stay put, I'm coming, she commanded before hanging up. I sank onto a crate and buried my head in my hands. What was I supposed to do? 3 months. Millions in debt. A lawsuit from my husband. This wasn't just a pit, it was an abyss. And I was falling straight to the bottom. Edith arrived 20 minutes later, bursting into the workshop like a whirlwind, 2 grocery bags in hand. Well, you found a spot for solitude, she said, trying to sound cheerful. It's colder here than outside. I brought hot coffee and buns. You need to eat. She was my lifeline. My only island of sanity in this ocean of madness. As I sipped the scorching coffee, she looked around the space sufficiently. All right, she said firmly. Enough moping. Your father didn't orchestrate all this for you to give up on day one. He wanted you to fight. So we'll fight. I'm with you. But where do I start? Edith, I don't understand any of this. Accounting, production, it's a dark forest to me. Start with the basics. The papers, she said, nodding toward a small door in the corner of the workshop. The director's office is in there somewhere. Let's see what your beloved left behind. We entered the office. It was a small room with one window overlooking an overgrown courtyard. A desk, 2 chairs, a massive metal filing cabinet. Lazarus had clearly never bothered to tidy up. Stacks of folders piled on the desk, some invoices crumpled and thrown into a corner. Edith marched over to the cabinet. It wasn't locked. All right, let's get to prying, she said darkly, swinging the doors open. The next few days became a nightmare. Edith and I arrived at the factory early in the morning and left late at night. She had taken unpaid leave, saying she couldn't leave me alone. We sorted through the paper chaos, invoices, delivery notes, bank statements, contracts. The deeper we dug, the more terrifying the picture became. Everything pointed to monstrous mismanagement, total incompetence. Suppliers hadn't been paid for months, so they refused to deliver quality raw materials. Taxes were late, piling up huge fines. Equipment hadn't been serviced in years. Lazarus had just let everything run itself. He siphoned the last money from the perfumery to maintain his lavish lifestyle, without investing a cent back into the business. He's just an idiot, Edith said, throwing another folder of overdue invoices onto the desk. A terrible manager. How could your father trust him with this? I stayed silent. I didn't understand either. Maybe my father hoped Lazarus would change. Or maybe he deliberately handed the business to someone who would ruin it. My father's letter haunted me. I had to do it. One evening, when we were exhausted and ready to leave, my gaze fell on my father's old desk, tucked in the corner, buried under clutter. Lazarus had apparently used a newer desk, leaving this one to gather dust. Wait, I said to Edith. Let's see what's in there. We pushed aside boxes and old catalogs. The desk was solid oak, just like Sebastian's. I began mechanically pulling out the drawers. Empty. Paper clips. A dried-up pen. Then one of the lower drawers jammed. It slid out 2/3 of the way and stopped. I tugged harder, useless. Let me try, Edith said, moving closer. She pulled too. The drawer wouldn't budge. I sank to my knees to peer into the gap. Something was blocking it. I slid my hand inside and felt an uneven surface on the back wall. It wasn't the drawer's back, it was a panel. A false panel. My heart raced. I pressed on the panel. A quiet click sounded. The panel gave way, revealing a small hidden compartment. Inside, at the back of the drawer, lay something that shouldn't have been there, a thin accounting ledger in a hard black cover. Not like the others, not worn, not stained with coffee. It looked almost new. I pulled it out. My hands trembled slightly. I opened the first page. This wasn't just a ledger. It was a neat, detailed journal. And the entries had been kept for the past 2 years. I began to read, and a chill ran down my spine. Edith peeked over my shoulder, her breaths coming fast and shallow. The first part of the journal recorded loans. Large ones. Very large ones. Tens of thousands of dollars borrowed from a company I had never heard of. Dates, amounts, contract numbers. And under each entry, a signature. Clear, confident, Lazarus's signature. These loans weren't in any official papers. They were black market money, bypassing the accounts entirely. Then came the most terrifying part, the second section of the book. Raw material purchases. Whole pages filled with ingredient names. But these weren't the noble oils, Bulgarian rose, Florentine iris, French jasmine, that had built Hayden Perfumery's reputation. They were cheap synthetic substitutes. Cheap chemicals. And all of them came from the same supplier, a name I had never seen before. Purchased by the ton, for cash. For the very loans he had taken. I flipped page after page, and the picture became horrifyingly clear. For 2 years, he had systematically replaced expensive natural ingredients with cheap synthetics. The price difference was staggering. Where had the money gone? The answer was obvious. The debt Sebastian had mentioned was just the tip of the iceberg. The real financial pit Lazarus had dug was far deeper. And it had been done intentionally. I closed the book. My ears were ringing. Edith sat silently, stunned. And then I understood. This wasn't incompetence. It wasn't poor management or negligence. Every step had been deliberate. Every loan, every cheap purchase, every signature. It was a cold, methodical plan to destroy the business. Lazarus hadn't just mismanaged the company. He had been deliberately, step by step, driving it toward bankruptcy for 2 years. He was killing it from the inside. He did this on purpose, I whispered, more to myself than to Edith. He knew exactly what he was doing. But why? Edith sank into a chair, her face white as chalk. Why destroy what fed him? It makes no sense. I shook my head. It had a purpose. I just hadn't seen it yet. But I could feel it, like the cold breath of a predator in the dark. This wasn't just the revenge of a humiliated husband. It was part of something bigger, something far more terrifying. What do we do now? Edith asked. Can we take this to the police? This is fraud. And tell them what? I said bitterly. That my husband was taking loans for the company he ran? They'll call it a business dispute. And his signature is on every contract. Meanwhile, my 3 months will be up. My father didn't set that deadline for nothing. He knew I wouldn't have time for lawsuits. So we need to find money. Edith jumped up again, unable to sit still. We have to cover the debts. Go to a bank, take out a loan against something. I just shook my head. Loan against what? The house? Lazarus has already filed for division. The house is probably under lien. Loan against the perfumery? Who would lend money to a business about to sink? The next day, confirming my worst fears, the phone rang. It was the city's main bank. A cold, indifferent female voice informed me that due to the change in leadership at Hayden Perfumery and its unstable financial status, the bank demanded immediate full repayment of the main credit line, the official one Sebastian had mentioned. But the contract says payments should be monthly, I began. Clause 7.4, the woman cut in sharply. The bank has the right to demand full repayment if risks arise that threaten the borrower's solvency. You have 10 working days. Otherwise, we will start foreclosure proceedings on all collateral, the building and equipment of the perfumery. She hung up. 10 days. I had 10 days to come up with an amount equal to the value of several apartments downtown. It was the end. Lazarus knew about this clause. He waited until I inherited the business to strike. He wasn't just sinking the ship, he was calling in the sharks. Word spread across the city like wildfire. I don't know how. Maybe some bank clerk spilled the news. Maybe Lazarus made sure of it himself. But by evening, I began to feel it. I went to the grocery store, and the clerk who had known me for 10 years and always smiled at me suddenly pretended not to notice me. 2 women in line, seeing me, deliberately turned away and whispered loudly. They say it's really bad. She ruined her father's business in a month. And her husband ran off, they say. He couldn't handle it. She exhausted him completely. Every word stung like a bee. I dropped my basket and ran out of the store. I got in my car, my hands shaking. They weren't just talking about my divorce. They were blaming me. Lazarus hadn't just ruined me in front of friends at my birthday. Now he was destroying my reputation across the city. He was turning me from a victim into a culprit, an incompetent, hysterical woman who had squandered the legacy of a great father. I was driving home, feeling like every window was staring at me with judgmental eyes. My city, once my home, had turned into hostile territory. At home, I called Edith. They all know, I said, struggling to hold back tears. The whole city thinks it's my fault. Forget them, she replied passionately. Don't pay attention to gossip. We need to act. I've called a few contacts, maybe someone will lend us money. It's useless, I said hollowly. No one will. Not for this kind of case. That evening, Edith came over. She looked tired and angry. You were right. No one even wants to listen. The moment they hear which business it is, they back off. Lazarus did a good job. He spread the word that the perfumery is a black hole. We sat in the kitchen in complete silence. Something had to be done. Desperation was a poor advisor. We needed to think, coldly, rationally. That hidden debt, I said suddenly. The one in the black book. The creditor. Who is it? Maybe we can negotiate? Get an extension? Edith looked at me. You think it's worth trying? These are probably shady people. Lending money illegally. Do we have a choice? I asked. We can't pay off the official debt. But if we can at least delay the unofficial one, maybe we have a chance. We need to know who we're dealing with. The next day, I went to Sebastian again, bringing the black book with me. He flipped through the pages for a long time, silently, expressionless, studying the signatures and names carefully. I thought so, he said finally, closing the ledger. Evan suspected something was off, but never got to the bottom of it. Can you find out who the creditor is? I asked. The book lists the name, Cascade Development Group. Sebastian nodded. I'll check. But I don't think you'll like the answer. Companies like this aren't set up to negotiate. They're made to take what's theirs. With interest. He promised to call as soon as he learned anything. I waited for that call for 2 days like it was a sentence. I barely left the house. Every trip outside was torture. I saw former acquaintances cross the street just to avoid greeting me. My social isolation became complete. The call came on the third day, in the evening. Sebastian's voice was colder than usual. Maya, I have information regarding your inquiry. What kind of company? I asked, my heart freezing. It's a so-called shell company. A paper company. Registered a year and a half ago. No real activity except financial transactions with your perfumery. Classic setup for money laundering or hostile takeovers. But who's behind it? My voice trembled. There was a pause. I heard him sigh heavily. I checked the registration documents through my channels. The founder and sole owner of this company is one person. Actually, one woman. Who? I whispered. You know the name, Olympia Blackwood? I went silent. I couldn't speak. The air left my lungs. Olympia. Lazarus's mother. My mother-in-law. It's her company, Sebastian said slowly, like hammering nails. For 2 years, Lazarus was borrowing money from his own mother. He drove the perfumery into debt to her. It started to sink in. Slowly, like rusty millstones turning. The scattered pieces of the puzzle suddenly formed a single monstrous picture. This wasn't Lazarus's revenge alone. It wasn't his personal initiative. It was a family conspiracy. Cold, calculating, stretched over years. They acted together. Mother and son. Olympia provided the money. Lazarus took it, while pocketing the budget on purchases, creating a huge unofficial debt. Now everything fell into place. His speech at my birthday. The immediate lawsuit. The bank's demand for early repayment. The rumors spreading across the city. All links in the same chain. They didn't just want to destroy me. They wanted the perfumery. To take it for pennies. When the official creditor, the bank, put it up for auction to cover the debts, there would be only one buyer. Cascade Development Group. Olympia's company. She would buy my father's life's work for the amount of the official debt, and the unofficial debt she would just forgive herself. They had planned it all. 10 years they waited. And now they were striking. Coordinated, ruthless, from every side. I was surrounded. I slowly lowered the phone receiver. The name Olympia Blackwood echoed in my head. Not just a mother-in-law who had never liked me, but a cold, calculating enemy. A spider who had been weaving her web for 2 years, now ready for the final, deadly bite. I sat in Sebastian's office, seeing nothing in front of me. Everything had fallen into place with horrifying clarity. Their contempt, their coldness over all 10 years. This wasn't just the arrogance of a wealthy family. It was the hatred of predators toward their future victim. They had waited. Waited for the contract to expire so they could take everything. My father, by paying Lazarus $1 million, had essentially bought 10 years of delay. He had bought me time I, foolishly, spent living under the illusion of a happy family life. Maya, Sebastian's voice brought me back to reality. I looked up at him. What do I do now? I asked, my voice hollow. They have everything. The money. The plan. And I have just a few days before the bank takes the building. Fight, he answered simply. Evan didn't set this up for you to give up. He knew they were strong. But he believed you were smarter. Smarter? I felt like the biggest fool in the world. 10 years living under the same roof with my enemy, sharing a bed with him, and I noticed nothing. I left Sebastian's office and, for the first time in days, a different feeling began to boil inside me, cold, furious rage. Rage at Lazarus. At Olympia. And at my father, who had stirred this mess and left me to clean it up alone. He wanted me to be strong? Fine. I would be strong. I didn't go home. I went to the factory, the only place where I felt even a faint connection to reality. I called Edith and asked her to come. She was there within half an hour. I laid everything out: Olympia, her shell company, their family conspiracy. Edith listened, her face hardening. Bastards, she hissed when I finished. What total bastards? This is insane. To plan something like this? They think they've already won, I said, my voice firmer than I expected. They're sure I'll break, pay up, and give it all away for next to nothing. They're pressing from every side: bank, court, public opinion. They want to corner me, so I crawl to them with a white flag. But we won't give in, Edith said, fire in her eyes. We'll show them. But how? Maya, we don't have money to fight the bank. You don't fight them with money, I said, pacing the dusty office. The chaotic, panicked thoughts in my head began to line up logically. They'll always have more money. So we hit where they're vulnerable. And where is that? Edith asked hopefully. Reputation, I answered. In our city, reputation is everything. Right now, they're portraying me as an incompetent fool destroying my father's business, and themselves as noble saviors ready to rescue what I'm about to sink. We need to flip that story. I stopped at the window and looked out at the overgrown courtyard. We need the city to believe in Hayden Perfumery again. To remember what it was. To want to save it. And how do we do that? Put an ad in the paper? Edith scoffed. No, I turned to her. We'll show them ourselves. We'll host an open day. Right here, at the factory. Edith looked at me like I'd lost my mind. Here? In this ruin? Who are you going to invite? Everyone. I said, surprised by the strength of my own voice. Journalists. Dad's old partners. Influential people in the city. Everyone who was at my birthday and saw my humiliation. We'll show them not the ruin, but the heart of this place. We'll make them feel again what my grandfather and father built. The idea, just born, began to take shape with details. We won't ask for money. We'll show them the legacy. We still have real, pure essences that Lazarus hasn't replaced with his chemicals yet. We'll give them a tour, tell the story of each scent. Remind them that Hayden Perfumery isn't just a business. It's part of the city's history. Something to be proud of. Edith listened, and her skepticism slowly turned into excitement. And then what? They'll come, look, smell. And then what? And then, I paused, I'll tell them the truth. Not everything, of course, not about Olympia and her company, that would just scare them. I'll tell them that the perfumery was deliberately driven to bankruptcy, and that I need a partner. An investor. Someone who will believe in reviving the legend and help fight the creditors. It's our only chance. To find someone to stand up to the Blackwoods. To play on local pride, on respect for my father's memory. This is insane, Edith exhaled. But it could work. It's so audacious, it might just work. For the first time in days, I felt not just rage, but hope. A thin, timid beam of light in the darkness. We had a plan. Crazy, desperate, but a plan. The next few days, we worked like maniacs. Edith was indispensable, handling all the organization, making guest lists, calling journalists, writing invitation texts. Her energy and faith in me worked wonders. I dove into the perfumery work. I found the old masters who had worked under my father, whom Lazarus had dismissed as unnecessary. At first they were skeptical, but when I told them my plan, showing them the black book with the synthetic purchases, a spark lit in their eyes. They loved this work. Together, we went through the old stock. Luckily, The most valuable essences were kept in a special cellar, and Lazarus apparently hadn't touched them. We found a few bottles of the legendary Imperial Garden scent created by my grandfather. One whiff transported you to a blooming spring garden after the rain. We scrubbed and cleaned the workshops. We polished the copper stills until they gleamed. We made everything presentable so we wouldn't be ashamed to show it to people. With every cleaned window, with every pile of trash removed, I felt myself coming back to life. I was no longer a humiliated victim. I was the owner. I was fighting for what was mine. In the evenings, Edith and I sat in the office, drinking tea from a thermos and making plans. I shared all my thoughts with her, my fears, my hopes. She was my only support, my confidant, the only person in the world I could tell absolutely everything to. "You need to give a speech," she said. "Strong, from the heart, so everyone in the room knows you won't give up. So they see not a broken woman, but a daughter of her father." She helped me craft the speech. Together, we chose words, built sentences. She supported me when I broke down, when it felt like everything was pointless and nothing would work. "It will work," she said firmly. "We'll make them believe." The open day was set for the end of the week. Invitations were sent. A few local journalists confirmed. We had only 2 days. The night before the event, we stayed at the factory late. Candles had to be arranged, scent samples prepared, everything checked again. We finished after midnight. I felt utterly exhausted, but also a heady sense of excitement. I had a chance. "All set," Edith said, surveying the transformed workshop. "Tomorrow's the day. I'm going to get a few hours of sleep. What about you?" "I'll stay a little longer," I replied. "I want to be here alone, in the quiet." She hugged me. "It'll be fine," she whispered. "I believe in you. See you in the morning." She left. I wandered the echoing halls for another half hour, breathing in the scents, preparing myself for the battle ahead. Then I turned off the lights and stepped outside. The night was quiet and cool. I closed the heavy door, turned the key in the lock, and got into my car. I was about to start the engine when headlights appeared from a neighboring street. They were coming from where our industrial district ended and the upscale mansion area began. The area where the biggest and most beautiful mansion belonged to Olympia Blackwood. The car turned under a streetlight, and for a second I saw clearly. It was Edith's car. And she was driving. Alone. Coming from my mother-in-law's house. From the house of my greatest enemy. A coldness, unrelated to the night air, gripped me from fingertips to heart. This couldn't be. Just a coincidence. Maybe she was visiting someone else. There were plenty of people in that district. But at 2 a.m, the day before the decisive battle, I watched the red taillights fade, and the tiny spark of hope that had burned so brightly in me all day began to die slowly, painfully. I started the car and drove home. All the way, I tried to find a logical explanation. Maybe a friend lived there. Maybe she was borrowing money from me. Anything. I clung to those thoughts like a drowning person to a straw. I forced myself to believe them. Because if even Edith had betrayed me, then I was truly alone. Completely alone in a world where everyone I loved had either deceived me or plotted against me. I didn't sleep all night. I lay staring at the ceiling. And the terrible thought returned again and again, her involvement. Her advice. Her help with the speech. She knew every step I had planned, every move. If she was with them, then they knew everything too. In the morning, I felt as though I hadn't slept for a week. But today was the decisive day. I couldn't allow myself to collapse. I got up, took an icy shower, put on a strict but elegant dress, did my hair and makeup. I looked in the mirror. Pale face, dark circles under my eyes. But in my gaze, steel. Today I would either win or lose everything for good. By 11 a.m., I was at the factory. The old masters I had called were already there. They were nervous, glancing at the clock repeatedly. In the main workshop, everything was ready, tables with scent samples, light snacks, candles. The air was filled with subtle, layered fragrances. Everything was perfect. Exactly at noon, Edith arrived. She was fresh and energetic, wearing a smart business suit. "Ready for battle?" she asked cheerfully, hugging me. I forced a smile. "Ready." Her embrace felt cool to me. I looked into her eyes, searching for any sign of deceit, but found none. She was genuine warmth and support. Maybe I had really been mistaken yesterday. I wanted to believe that so badly. At 1 p.m., the guests started arriving. Journalists from 2 local newspapers. The director of the local history museum, an elderly, cultured man who had known my father well. A few of my father's old business partners, who looked at me with curiosity and a touch of sympathy. About 20 people in total. A small group, but these were the people whose opinions carried weight in the city. Among the guests, I spotted Sebastian, standing quietly against the wall, observing. I took a deep breath and began. I led them through the workshops, telling the story of the factory. I showed them the old equipment, explaining how my grandfather traveled the world searching for recipes for unique fragrances. The masters opened bottles of the purest essences, and waves of scent filled the room: sharp bergamot, sweet vanilla, bitter wormwood. The guests listened intently. Their tense expressions shifted to surprise, even admiration. The plan was working. They weren't seeing ruins, they were seeing a sleeping legend. The climax of the tour was the main distillation apparatus, the heart of the perfumery. A huge copper alembic, where a fresh batch of our most valuable essence was slowly being prepared, made from a rare white iris. Its value was comparable to gold. These were nearly all of our remaining liquid assets. The demonstration of the distillation process was supposed to be the dramatic finale before my speech. We approached the alembic. It bubbled quietly, sending a thin stream of fragrant vapor through a small tube. "And this, ladies and gentlemen," I began proudly, "is our greatest treasure." Then came a loud, sharp crack, like a thick glass bottle breaking. Everyone flinched. From beneath the copper dome of the alembic, a thick, acrid smoke suddenly billowed up. It wasn't white and fragrant, it was dirty gray, smelling not of flowers but of burnt rubber and some disgusting chemical. One of the masters screamed and rushed to the apparatus, trying to close the steam valve, but it was too late. The smoke poured out stronger, filling the workshop. People began coughing, covering their faces with handkerchiefs. The beautiful atmosphere we had worked so hard to create was destroyed in an instant. Sweet fragrances mixed with the foul stench. The celebration had turned into a disaster. "What happened?" shouted one of the guests. The master, pale as a sheet, turned to me. "A crack. In the cooling coil, a crack." The pressure spiked, and technical oil got into the distillate. I stared at him, and the full horror of what had happened slowly sank in. The entire batch of priceless white iris essence was ruined, contaminated with stinking technical oil. This wasn't just a failed demonstration. It was total financial ruin. We had lost the last of what we had. The guests panicked and started backing toward the exits. The journalists pulled out cameras, snapping photos of the chaos, of the shame. I stood in the smoky workshop, feeling the ground fall away beneath me. This was the end, complete and final. I didn't just look incompetent, I looked ridiculous. I saw Edith's face. Horror and sympathy written all over it. She rushed to me. "Maya, what a nightmare. This is awful." But I no longer believed her. A crack. In an old, reliable, decades-tested apparatus. On the day of the presentation. An hour ago, everything had been working perfectly. This couldn't be an accident. It was sabotage, and in that moment, when I wanted to collapse and cry on the floor, that cold rage awoke inside me again. They wanted to see me broken. They wouldn't. I stepped into the center of the hall. The smoke was slowly clearing, but the stench remained. "Excuse me, ladies and gentlemen. May I have your attention?" I shouted as loudly as I could. The people, already crowded near the exits, stopped and turned toward me. What you just witnessed, I said, my voice trembling, not from tears, but from anger, was not an accident. It was sabotage. Another attempt to destroy my father's business. The room went silent. You all know my story. You know what happened at my birthday. You've heard the rumors spreading through the city that I can't manage. And now you see this. They aren't just spreading rumors. They act. They break equipment, destroy valuable raw materials, do everything they can to make sure this factory never runs again. They want to take it, crush it, and build another faceless shopping center in its place. The words came naturally. This wasn't the speech Edith and I had prepared. This was a cry from the soul. But I will not give up. I swept my gaze across their faces. As long as I am alive, Hayden Perfumery will live. Even if I have to start over from scratch, on empty ground. This is my family's business, it's part of our city's history, and I will not let anyone destroy it. I finished. For a few seconds, there was silence. Then the museum director, the elderly, cultured man, started clapping. First alone, then others joined. The applause was sparse and uncertain, but it was there. I saw in some people's eyes not pity, but respect. Yet I knew this was only a moral victory. Financially, it was a complete disaster. After such a disgrace, no investor would touch us. The event was ruined. Guests left. Journalists departed with sensational material for their articles. Only Edith, the old masters, Sebastian, and I remained. I don't understand how this could happen, the headmaster lamented. I checked everything myself this morning. The coil was perfect. This could only happen if it was hit hard. I looked at Edith. She averted her gaze. That evening, Sebastian drove me home. We rode in silence. When we arrived, he didn't rush to say goodbye. I was at your event, he said, staring straight ahead. You held yourself with dignity. Your father would have been proud of you. What's the point? I said lifelessly. I've lost everything. The last money burned up in that cursed apparatus. Tomorrow or the day after, the bank will put the building up for auction. It's over. The lawyer turned to me, his face more serious than ever. Not everything, he said quietly. Your father was a very clever man, Maya. He could think several steps ahead. Like a brilliant chess player. He reached into his old leather briefcase and pulled out another sealed envelope. Exactly like the one with the letter. There was another clause in the will. Secret. He instructed me to open this envelope and reveal its contents only in one case. In what case? I asked, confused. If your attempts to save the business encounter deliberate, malicious interference from family members. That's exactly what the will says. What happened today is precisely that interference. And we have 20 witnesses, including the press. That is enough to trigger this clause. Your father anticipated this scenario. He left you a second, backup inheritance. For their betrayal. I stared at the sealed envelope in Sebastian's hands, my heart pounding. Another inheritance. Another clause in this devilish will. My father, even in death, he was still pulling the strings, playing his complex, incomprehensible game. What's in it? I breathed. Money? Stocks? Much better, the lawyer replied, and for the first time, a hint of a smile flickered at the corners of his mouth. It's something you can't seize, freeze, or steal. It's the ground beneath your feet. He opened the envelope and handed me the document. It was an official form from the registration office, complete with watermarks and a blue seal, a certificate of ownership. I scanned the lines. Address, Industrial Street, 7. The perfumery's address. And in the owner field, my name, Maya Hayden. I read it over and over, unable to believe my eyes. But how? Everyone always thought we were renting this building from the city. Lazarus said so. Father never. Your father was a master of misinformation when he needed to be, Sebastian interrupted. He bought this building 15 years ago, quietly, through a shell company he later dissolved. He arranged the deal so no one in the city knew. All these years he paid property taxes through a third-party account in another state. To everyone, including the Blackwoods, the perfumery was just a tenant. Only in the case of proven sabotage by the family would ownership transfer to you. Today, that moment has come. I lowered the document. My mind was spinning. This changed everything. Absolutely everything. The bank could seize equipment, accounts, even the Hayden Perfumery name for the debts. But it couldn't take the building, which wasn't theirs. It wasn't collateral. It was mine. Personally mine. By trying to sabotage my business to take it for debts, the Blackwoods had unknowingly handed me the most powerful weapon. They thought they were pulling the ground from under me. Instead, they had freed my hands. What does this mean in practice? I asked, struggling to control my emotions. It means, Sebastian said, eyes flashing, that the legal entity of Hayden Perfumery, burdened with debt, and the building it occupies are two separate things. As the building's owner, you have the full right to terminate the lease with the unscrupulous tenant, that is, with yourself. Or more precisely, the company you currently manage. The plan formed instantly in my mind. Clear, daring, and brilliantly simple. I'm evicting Hayden Perfumery from my building, I said, my voice ringing with newly found strength. I'm terminating the lease. And the company? I'll bankrupt the company. Let the bank take the old equipment and Lazarus's debts. Let Olympia keep her unofficial loans, which she will never recover. And I will open a new company in my own clean building. From scratch. Without a single debt. That's exactly what your father intended, Sebastian nodded. It was his backup plan. A scorched earth strategy. That night, I slept for the first time in a long while. A few hours, but it was deep, dreamless sleep. I woke with a clear sense of purpose. I was no longer a victim cornered. I was a hunter. The next morning, Sebastian and I prepared all the necessary papers, notice of lease termination and demand for immediate vacating of the premises. The lawyer suggested sending it by mail, but I refused. No, I said. I will deliver this personally. I knew exactly where to find him. Lazarus had moved into his bachelor apartment, the one he had before our marriage, luxurious, in a new building downtown. I arrived around noon. Took the elevator to the 10th floor. Knocked. Silence for a few seconds, then footsteps. The door opened. Lazarus. In a silk robe, disheveled, but with the same smug smirk on his face. Seeing me, he didn't look surprised. He was savoring the moment. Well, look who lost, he drawled lazily. Come to beg for mercy? Ready to accept my terms? I might still agree to a settlement if you behave. He leaned on the doorframe, scanning me head to toe. He expected tears, pleas, hysteria. He wanted to see me crushed. I stared silently into his eyes, then handed him a folded sheet of paper. This is for you, I said evenly. He smirked, took the paper, and lazily unfolded it. He started reading, and I watched as his smug expression slowly slid off his face. The smirk vanished. His eyebrows drew together over his nose. He reread the document, then looked at me, bewildered, unable to comprehend. What is this? He asked, as if he couldn't believe his eyes. What lease? What eviction? Have you lost your mind? This building is municipal property. Not anymore, I replied, savoring every word. It hasn't been for 15 years. It belongs to me. And I am evicting your debt pit from my building. You have 24 hours to remove everything that belongs to the company. After that, I change the locks. His face flushed crimson. He understood. He realized the monstrous mistake they had made. He realized their brilliant plan had just collapsed. You can't, he screamed. It's illegal, completely legal, I shot back. Check with your mommy. Or her lawyers. They'll confirm. Your game is over, Lazarus. You lost. I turned to leave. I had said everything I wanted. I saw on his face exactly what I wanted: shock, rage, helplessness. My revenge was nearly complete. I had already stepped toward the elevator when I heard his laughter behind me. Not a happy laugh. A hysterical, spiteful cackle. I turned. He was standing in the doorway, waving my notice. A dark, insane fire burned in his eyes. Your building? He hissed through laughter. You think this is your building? How naive you are, Maya. You still don't understand anything. He disappeared into the apartment and a second later came back holding a document. He came right up to me and shoved it under my nose. Read it, he growled. Read it, heiress. It was a sales contract. For the building at Industrial Street, 7. I saw my father's signature. Next to it, another signature. And a seal. The contract was dated 5 years earlier. And in black and white, it stated that Evan Hayden had sold 50% of the building. Half. I looked up at the buyer's name. A name that made my vision darken again. The buyer, Olympia Blackwood. My mother is a co-owner. Lazarus spat at me. 50-50. For 5 years now. So you won't be evicting anyone. Half of this land, half of every brick in this wall, is ours. And now we'll decide what happens here. Not you. That can't be, I whispered. He would never have sold her a single inch of this land. Your father was a businessman, Maya. Lazarus smirked maliciously, putting the paper away. And my mother made him an offer he couldn't refuse. Money decides everything. You still don't get it. He slammed the door right in my face. Clicked the lock. I was left alone in the empty hallway, stunned and broken. My most powerful weapon had become useless. I couldn't evict them. I was trapped in the same cage with them. I went downstairs, sat in my car, and just stared blankly at the steering wheel. The signature. It looked real. I had seen my father's signature hundreds of times. That bold, confident handwriting. Had he deceived me here too? Was his plan even more intricate, and was this sale part of it? Or had the Blackwoods tricked him? No, that was impossible. My father could not be fooled in business. I drove to Sebastian. I barged into his office without knocking and threw a copy of the contract on his desk, the one I had managed to photograph on my phone while Lazarus waved it around. What is this? I asked, barely holding back. The old lawyer studied the image on my phone in silence for a long time, zooming in and out. Not a single muscle on his face twitched. It's a forgery, he said finally, calmly and confidently. Are you sure? I asked, desperate for hope. The signature, it's so similar. Similar. Very high-quality forgery. He removed his glasses. But I know your father's handwriting better than my own. I worked with him for 40 years. There are microscopic details you cannot copy, the tilt, the pressure at certain points. I am certain the expert analysis will confirm it. For a second, a weight lifted from my chest. A forgery. I was right. But Sebastian immediately dispelled my relief. Don't celebrate yet, Maya. Proving it's a forgery takes time. We'll have to go to court. Order a handwriting expert. It could take months. Maybe a year. And you don't have that time. He was right. While the courts dragged on, the Blackwoods, as legal co-owners, could block any of my actions. I wouldn't be able to evict anyone, sell anything, or start anything. I'd be trapped in a legal deadlock, losing money with every passing day. In 3 months, when the term in the will expired, I'd be completely bankrupt. And they wouldn't even have to do anything, everything would automatically go to the creditors. This fake contract was the perfect tool to paralyze me, tie my hands and feet, and calmly wait for my demise. They'll file a counterclaim, Sebastian continued, thinking aloud. They'll claim management rights. Demand a court-appointed director. And they'll succeed, because the document in their hands is considered valid until the court decides. We'll be stuck in this swamp completely. I left his office feeling even more desperate than before. One thing was fighting an enemy. A completely different thing was fighting a ghost on paper, a lie that couldn't be disproven quickly. The Blackwoods didn't wait long. The very next day, I received official papers from their lawyers. I was prohibited from taking any actions related to the perfumery building without the written consent of the second owner, Olympia Blackwood. They stopped my eviction. They had trapped me. Days flowed in a thick, suffocating agony. I was paralyzed. I went to the empty factory, wandered the workshops, and could do nothing. The masters I had called had left, realizing the project was stalled. Edith called every day, offering help, sympathizing, but I gave one-word answers. After everything I had seen, I couldn't trust her anymore. But I had no proof against her either. I was alone. I needed proof. Something that could shatter their lie, not in a year, but now. Right now. Some document, a witness, anything. I went over everything I knew about my father's affairs again and again. But I knew so little. He never let me in on his business secrets. Then I remembered. The country house. Our old family country house, where I had spent my entire childhood. After my father's death, we rarely went there, but the house was kept in order. My father loved it. He had his office there, where he worked on weekends. He said he thought better there. And all his personal papers, unrelated to his main business, diaries, letters, old notebooks, were kept there. The thought was desperate, but it was something. I drove there. The little house greeted me with silence and the scent of pine. A dusty, cool house, everything left just as it had been when my father was alive. I went up to the second floor, to his office. A large room with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a massive desk, and a view of the river. I sat in his old leather chair. It still smelled of him. I began sorting through the papers. Hour after hour, I flipped through old folders, reading his notes. But none of it was what I needed. Business plans from 20 years ago, letters to childhood friends, drafts of some articles. Nothing that could help me now. The sun was setting, painting the room in orange. I sat there, completely drained. Hope was fading. I was about to leave when my gaze fell on the floor, the old oak parquet. And I remembered. I was about 10, playing in the office while my father worked at his desk. I dropped a toy under the table and crawled after it. That's when I noticed that one of the floorboards under his feet moved strangely. I showed him. He smiled, gave me a sly wink, and said, "This is my little secret, Maya. Here I keep the most important things. Don't tell anyone." I had quickly forgotten about it. But now, 30 years later, the memory came back with incredible clarity. My heart raced. I rushed to the desk, moved the heavy chair, and began inspecting the floorboards. And there it was. One board slightly shorter than the others, with a tiny, nearly invisible notch on the side. I pried it with my fingernail. The board lifted easily. Underneath was a small, metal-lined secret compartment. No money, no jewels. Just one thing. A thick leather-bound notebook, my father's personal diary. My hands trembled as I pulled it out. I sat on the floor and opened the first page. The last entries were made shortly before his death. He wrote about business, the weather, books he had read. I flipped through, searching for a clue. And I found it. The very last entry. Dated the day before his death. The handwriting was uneven, hurried, as if written in great agitation. Today came Olympia. Alone. Not to ask, but to demand. She showed me a folder with blackmail, a fake, made from start to finish. Supposedly, in the late 80s, I, as a student, wrote a denunciation against Keaton Simons, our dissident artist. And supposedly because of my report, he was imprisoned. Nonsense. But how to prove it now, 30 years later? All archives from that time, a dark forest. She threatened me. Said she'd publish everything if I didn't sell her half of the perfumery building for a symbolic price. She wants control. She wants to destroy my business through her worthless son. I read it, and my hair stood on end. Blackmail. That's how it was. He hadn't sold. He had been forced. I turned the page. The next entry was made at night, just a few hours before his heart stopped. I refused her. Sent her away. Told her to go to hell. She said if I didn't agree, she'd destroy me. And I believe her. I closed the diary. My ears were ringing. My father didn't die of a sudden heart attack. He was killed. Not by knife or bullet. Killed by blackmail, threats, and deceit. Olympia had come to him, pressed on his deepest vulnerabilities, his reputation, his honor. And his heart couldn't take it. He died the day after her visit. This wasn't coincidence. This was murder. I sat on the dusty floor of my father's office, clutching his diary to my chest. Inside me, everything turned upside down. The bitterness over Lazarus's betrayal, the humiliation at my birthday, the despair over debts, all of it faded. Gone. Only one overwhelming emotion remained, cold, black hatred. This was no longer a fight for the business. It wasn't a war over inheritance. It was a fight for my father's honor. For his good name, which this woman tried to trample in the mud. For his life, which she had essentially taken. I stood up. My movements became sharp, precise. The chaos in my mind was gone. There was a goal. Clear as a knife's edge. I wasn't going to Sebastian. I wasn't going to wait for expertise or courts. The legal games were over. Now I would speak their language, the language of blackmail and public accusation. I went downstairs, gripping the diary tightly. Got in my car and drove back into the city. To where? To the place she went every day at this time. The Aristocrat Cafe downtown. Her favorite spot. Every day, at exactly 5, she drank coffee there with a pastry, meeting her friends, the socialites. She reveled in her status, in her power. Well, today's performance would be special. I entered the cafe. As I expected, she was there. Sitting at her favorite window table, surrounded by 2 equally dressed and haughty ladies. She held a coffee cup, pinky extended, talking animatedly. Her friends listened attentively, nodding. But next to her, at the same table, sat another person. Edith. My cousin. My only support. She was sitting next to my father's killer, smiling politely, listening to her story. The moment I saw them together, the last doubts I had been desperately pushing away evaporated. It was all true. My last support had turned out to be another traitor. I walked to their table. Straight across the cafe. The click of my heels on the marble floor was loud and threatening. Conversations at nearby tables started to fade. People turned to watch. Olympia saw me first. Her smile froze, replaced by an expression of cold disdain. "What do you want here?" she asked loudly, so everyone could hear. "Come to beg?" Edith saw me. She flinched, fear flashing across her face, quickly masked by a look of sympathy. "Maya, what's wrong?" "You're so pale," she said. I ignored her. I looked only at Olympia. I approached their table and stopped. "I know what you did," I said quietly, my voice ringing with restrained fury. "I know how you tried to blackmail my father." Not a single muscle moved on Olympia's face. Only her eyes turned into shards of ice. Her friends froze, mouths open. "You seem to have been in the sun too long, little girl," she hissed. "What are you talking about?" I placed my father's diary on the table. Right next to her porcelain cup. "It's all here," I said, looking her straight in the eyes. "How you came to him. How you threatened him with a fabricated report. How you demanded he sell you half the building." A deathly silence fell over the cafe. The hum of the refrigerator behind the bar was loud in the stillness. Olympia cast a quick glance at the diary, then back at me. A nasty, contemptuous smirk appeared on her lips. "Diary?" she laughed, dry, joyless. You dragged in the ramblings of an old man and think this can scare anyone? It's just the sad nonsense of a dying man. No one will believe this wild story. My father was not crazy. I shouted. He died the day after your visit. You killed him. Maya, stop. Edith's voice suddenly cut through. She jumped up from her seat, hysteria creeping in. What are you saying? You've lost your mind. Mrs. Blackwood had nothing to do with this. She stood between us, as if shielding Olympia from me. Calm down, let's go. She tried to take my hand. You need to rest. You're not yourself. I pulled my hand away like it was fire. Don't touch me, I hissed, staring her down. I saw everything. I saw your car at their house. At night. You're with them. You've been with them all along. Edith recoiled. Her face twisted in fear for a moment, then quickly returned to that righteous, indignant mask. What are you talking about? She yelled. I've been helping you. I've been by your side every minute. And you accuse me of this? Yes, I went to Mrs. Blackwood. I went to plead with her, to beg her to leave you alone, to have mercy on you. And you? Ungrateful. The audacity of her lie stole my breath. Olympia watched the scene with obvious pleasure. The show I had planned for her was backfiring. To the onlookers, I truly looked like a hysterical, unhinged woman attacking the only person trying to help me. You're lying, I said, my voice low. Then Edith stopped pretending. The mask of sympathy fell from her face. Her eyes narrowed, and in them, I saw the same cold hatred I had seen in Blackwood. Yes, she spat, her voice hissing. I helped them, and I will continue to help. You think this is about money? About your perfumery? How naive you are, little sister. She stepped toward me. Our family's enemies. 4 generations. Ever since your grandfather cheated mine, took the land. The very plot where your precious factory now stands. My father spent his life trying to make it right, but your father, Evan, destroyed him, ruined him, and drove him to an early grave. I listened, and my world collapsed completely. All my childhood, our friendship, all her words of support, all lies. I've waited my whole life for this, she hissed, venom dripping from every word. I've waited for the moment to return what belongs to my family by right. To destroy Hayden just like you destroyed us. I smiled at you, comforted you, while every evening I reported to Blackwood on your every move, every plan. The sabotage at the factory, my idea. And this is only the beginning. We will erase you and the memory of your father to dust. I stood in the middle of the cafe, surrounded by a vacuum. I saw Edith's hatred-distorted face, Olympia's triumphant smirk, the frightened and curious faces of other patrons. The accusation of murder, based on the diary entries, now seemed the ramblings of a mad woman. And Edith's confession? Who would believe it? She framed it as a long-standing family feud, and I, driven to desperation, had attacked her with wild accusations. In the eyes of the city, I was no longer just a failure. I was a dangerous, unbalanced woman, suffering from paranoia. I don't remember how I left the cafe. Don't remember how I got to my car. My hands mechanically turned the wheel, my feet pressed the pedals, but I wasn't really there. I was an empty shell. I drove through the streets, feeling like the whole city was laughing at me. At home, I collapsed on the couch and lay there for hours, staring at the ceiling. No tears. No anger. Only emptiness. All-consuming, icy emptiness. They had won. Won on every front. Destroyed my reputation, my business, my faith in people. I had nothing left. Not a single ally. Not a single lead. The phone rang nonstop. Surely journalists, having heard about the cafe scandal. I didn't answer. In the evening, there was a persistent, long ring at the door. I didn't want to open it, but it wouldn't stop. Finally, I dragged myself to the door and looked through the peephole. Sebastian was standing there. I opened it. He stepped in, silently assessing me from head to toe. His gaze was heavy, with no judgment, but there was a harsh sorrow in it. "News travels fast in our city," he said, removing his old-fashioned coat. "The entire mayor's office is buzzing." I walked silently into the living room. He followed. "That was a reckless move, Maya," he said, sitting down. "Very reckless. You went at them with your visor up, armed with nothing but emotions. The diary is not proof for court. And your sister's words will now be used against you." "I know," I replied, lifelessly. "I've lost everything." He paused. "The lawyer called me an hour ago," he continued. "They're making you an offer. The last one." "What kind?" I asked, disinterested. "They're willing to buy your share of the building. For a very modest sum. Laughably small, really. In return, they drop all lawsuits, the bank forgives part of the debt, and you leave town. Quietly, without scandal. And you never come back." I listened, indifferent. "Leave? Maybe that's the way out. Hide somewhere no one knows me. Where there are no sideways glances, no whispers behind my back. Start over, if that's even possible after all this." "That's not an offer," Sebastian said. "It's an ultimatum. They know you're cornered. They know in a few weeks you'd lose everything anyway. But they don't want a scandal. They want the story of your father's blackmail buried. And your silence is part of the deal." "I agree," I said. The words slipped out on their own. Easy. Because I didn't care anymore. I had no strength left to fight. Father was wrong. He thought he could forge a fighter out of me. Instead, he broke me. Completely. Sebastian steadied me for a long moment. I saw the disappointment in his eyes. "Are you sure?" he asked quietly. "You're ready to give it all away just like that? Everything your father fought for?" "I have no choice," I replied. "I have nothing left." He nodded slowly. Maybe you're right. Maybe this is the smartest move." He stood and walked to his briefcase by the door. Placed it on the table, clicked the locks. I thought he'd pull out papers for me to sign. But he didn't. He just stood there, watching me. "I've been thinking all these days," he said, breaking the silence, "whether the moment your father spoke of has arrived. The moment he mentioned." I lifted my tired eyes to him. "What moment?" "Your father was a brilliant strategist, but a poor psychologist," Sebastian said slowly. "He thought humiliation and betrayal would harden you. But he didn't account for the fact they could break you. So he left me one last instruction. The very last one." He looked at me intently, as if trying to peer into my soul. He said, "Sebastian, if you see my daughter on the edge, ready to give up, ready to throw it all away. If you realize she no longer wants to fight, only then, at the very last moment, reveal my final secret to her. To see if there's still a spark of will to fight. Or if the fire is truly gone." I stared at him, confused. "I think," he continued, "that moment has come. Right now. You're on the edge." He opened the briefcase. Inside, in a special compartment with a combination lock I hadn't noticed before, something lay. He entered the code, the lock clicked. He reached in and pulled out another envelope. Identical to the previous two. Sealed with wax and our family crest. "Your father said that on a chessboard there should always be one piece the opponent doesn't even suspect," Sebastian said, placing the envelope on the table before me. "A piece that can appear at the very end and deliver checkmate. Blackwood thinks they've eaten all your pieces. But they don't know about this one." I stared at the envelope, not daring to touch it. "What's inside?" "Not money, not property papers," Sebastian replied. "It's something that can verify your father's words in the diary. Something that can turn the ramblings of a dying man into irrefutable evidence. A witness. A key witness your father prepared years ago. Someone who can confirm the story about the blackmail." My heart, which I thought had stopped feeling anything, skipped a beat and then started racing. A witness. A living witness. I took the envelope with a trembling hand. It was heavy. I broke the seal and opened it. Inside was just one sheet of paper. Written neatly in Sebastian's handwriting was a name and an address. Will Garrett. And then, the name of a village in a neighboring county, street, and house number. The name looked vaguely familiar. Will? Who is Will? I asked, raising my eyes to the lawyer. He was your father's personal driver, Sebastian replied. He worked for him for over 20 years. Then, about 5 years before Evan's death, he was suddenly let go. Just one day. No one knew why. He received a large severance package and left town immediately. He disappeared. No one saw him again. Will. Uncle Will, as I had called him as a child. Of course I remembered him. Quiet, stern-looking man with big, calloused hands who drove my father for as long as I could remember. He always gave me little candies he hid in the glove compartment. And I remembered how he suddenly vanished. My father said then that Will had gone to relatives in another state. I didn't ask more. A driver? I looked at Sebastian. But what does he have to do with this? Your father trusted him, the lawyer said. Will was one of the few who knew almost everything about his affairs. Not the details, of course, but he was always close. He drove your father to meetings, waited for hours. He saw and heard a lot. And your father apparently thought Will could be the one to be there at the right moment. But why did he fire him? I think it was for his own safety, Sebastian suggested. To get him out of harm's way. To hide him. Your father sent him away, provided him with money, and left him as his final ace. A spark of will, the one my father had spoken of, ignited inside me. The emptiness that had filled me just a minute ago began to recede. Hope. Fragile, almost insane, but hope. We have to go, I said firmly. Right now. It's night, Sebastian objected. The village, according to the map, is 200 miles from here. The roads are bad. I don't care, I cut him off. I'm not waiting until morning. They think I'm broken. They expect me to sign their papers. We don't have time. Let's go. Fine, he nodded. I'll drive. We drove through the night. Rain pounded the windshield, and the wipers struggled to keep up. As Sebastian had warned, after leaving the main road, the path turned into a muddy mess full of potholes. The car shook and lurched from side to side. We drove in complete silence. I stared at the dark road stretching ahead, thinking of only one thing: I hoped he was there. That he was alive. That he would agree to speak. By morning, as the eastern sky began to lighten, we entered the village. A few crooked houses sank into the mud, not a single street lamp in sight. We found the street, if you could call it that, and the house. Small, sunk into the ground, with a rusted roof. Thin smoke rose from the chimney. We got out of the car. The air was cold, smelling of smoke and wet earth. We approached a low gate and knocked. Silence. We knocked louder. A dog barked. A minute later, the house door creaked open. An old, hunched man in a worn jacket appeared. He looked at us cautiously, his eyes wary, taking in the expensive car that stood out in the midst of the poverty. I barely recognized Will in him. Time and a hard life had changed him. Will Garrett? Sebastian asked. The old man nodded, silent. His eyes darted around, clearly frightened. We are from Evan Hayden, the lawyer continued. At my father's name, the man flinched. His face froze. I don't know any Hayden, he muttered. You're mistaken. He tried to close the door. I stepped forward, blocking it with my shoulder. Uncle Will, it's me, Maya, I said softly. Evan's daughter. You remember me. He looked at me. Recognition flickered in his faded eyes for a second, then was replaced by even greater fear. Leave, he whispered. Leave here. You don't belong. I have nothing to tell you. We need to talk to you, I said firmly. It's very important. It concerns my father's honor. I don't know anything, he almost shouted. I didn't see or hear anything. I'm just an old pensioner. Leave me alone. He tried to close the door again, but I pressed against it with my shoulder. They killed him, Uncle Will, I said, looking him straight in the eyes. I saw him flinch. Not physically. They drove him to death with blackmail and threats. Olympia Blackwood. I know you were there. You heard everything. He went pale as death. He glanced over his shoulder as if afraid someone was behind him. I didn't hear anything, he muttered. I was waiting in the car, as usual. Please, leave. I have a family, children, grandchildren. Fear. Primal, paralyzing fear. That's what controlled him. They hadn't just paid him for silence. They had threatened him. And then I understood, reasoning and pleading wouldn't work here. I had to speak another language. I was no longer little Maya, the girl he gave candies to. My father's blood spoke through me. I straightened. My voice became firm, commanding, like my father's during meetings. Will Garrett, I said coldly and clearly. My father trusted you for over 20 years. He considered you not just a driver, but a friend. He saved you, hiding you here. And now you betray his memory out of fear. The woman who killed your friend and boss is trying to take the last thing left from his daughter. She walks freely in this city, confident she's untouchable. And you are the only one who can stop her. Will you let her go unpunished? Will you let them trample the name of the man who did so much for you? He stood, head bowed, silent. His large hands trembled. Are you afraid for your family? I continued. I understand. But if you stay silent now, this woman and her son will get everything. And then no one will be safe. People capable of this will stop at nothing. Today they destroyed me. Tomorrow, they'll come for someone else. Maybe even you, to remove the last witness. Your silence won't save you. It will only delay your end. I paused, giving him time to consider my words. I'm not asking you to go to court. I'm not asking you to speak publicly. Just tell us. Tell the truth. Help me restore justice. For Evan's memory. He lifted his eyes to me. Tears stood in them. Forgive me, Maya, he whispered. Forgive an old fool. I was so scared. He stepped back from the door, letting us into the house. Inside, it was modest but clean. It smelled of the fireplace and dried herbs. We sat at a simple wooden table, and he began to speak. He told us everything. On the day Olympia came to Dad's country house, Will really had been waiting in the car. But before the meeting, my father had asked him to switch on a bug, a small device that streamed everything happening in the study to a receiver in the car. For safety. He did that always for important talks. And Will had heard it all. Every word. Olympia's threats. Her accusations. Her demand to be given half the building. He heard my father refuse her, heard him send her away. After she left, Dad called Will over. He was as pale as a sheet and clutching his chest. He told Will he had to leave immediately. Gave him an envelope of money and ordered him to disappear and tell no one where he went. Time will come, and they'll find you, he said. And then you must tell everything. A few days after Will left, men from Olympia came to the village. They found him. They offered him even more money for his silence, and told him that if he said a single word, his son, who lived and worked in our town, would be in an accident. Or his granddaughter would not return from school. He got scared. He took the money and kept quiet all these years, dying of fear and shame. I listened, clenching my fists. Can you confirm this? Sebastian asked. Your words are one thing. But Olympia will have her version. Will nodded. He rose, went to the old stove, pried out a brick and pulled out a small bundle wrapped in oilcloth. He unwrapped it on the table. Inside was a small, old cassette recorder. And beside it, several audio tapes. I didn't just listen, Will said, and for the first time his voice sounded steady. Evan taught me. He always said, never trust words, Will. Only trust what can be proven. I recorded their whole conversation, from the first word to the last. Are you sure the recording held up? Sebastian asked cautiously, taking one cassette. Tape degrades over time. I checked, Will nodded. Once a year I play it for a few seconds. Afraid it would demagnetize. The sound is clear. Like it was recorded yesterday. Tears of relief and gratitude pricked my eyes. I stood up, went to the old man and hugged him tightly. Thank you, Uncle Will. Thank you. You didn't just save me. You saved my father's honor. We took the recorder and the tapes. I promised Will I'd secure his family, move them to another town, buy them a house, do everything to keep Blackwood from reaching them. Now I felt sure we could do it. The drive back to town felt short. The rain had stopped and the sun was breaking through the clouds. Sebastian and I barely spoke. We both knew the turning point had arrived. The next move was ours. First we went to Sebastian's office. He needed an hour to find an old cassette player and carefully digitize the recording onto his computer. I sat beside him, and when my father's voice, alive, strong, confident, came through the speakers, I gasped. Then Olympia's cold, poisonous voice began. I listened to their conversation, every word I already knew from the diary, and chills ran down my spine. Hearing her threats and pressure was worse than reading it. My father trying to stay composed, it was monstrous. When the recording ended, Sebastian looked at me. Well then, Maya, it's time to finish this war. We have all the trumps. What do we do? I asked. Go to the police? He shook his head. No. That would be too loud. Too long. We don't need blood. We need unconditional surrender. We'll give them a chance to leave quietly. That will be their worst punishment, to lose everything without being able to play the victim. He picked up the phone and dialed. Luke, good afternoon. Sebastian Waverly. Yes. I need to meet you urgently. It concerns Hayden versus Blackwood. No, can't discuss over the phone. I have an offer your client can't refuse. Yes, it's an ultimatum. I'll expect you in an hour. Luke Bracey was Olympia's lawyer. Expensive, cynical, the city's best in dirty business. I was in the office when he arrived. Polished, cocky, he looked at me with slight derision. Sebastian, I hope this urgency is justified. My client is ready to celebrate victory and you drag me away from our work. Is your client prepared to sign our generous offer? Sebastian walked silently to the computer and pressed play. The conversation filled the room again. I watched Luke's face. First confusion, then recognition. He recognized his client's voice. The arrogance drained slowly from his face like a mask. When the tape reached Olympia's direct threats, he went pale. When it ended, he sat silently staring at the speakers. He understood. He understood they'd lost. This is staged, he muttered, but his voice wavered. Don't waste my time, Luke, Sebastian replied coldly. We both know an expert can prove authenticity in 5 minutes. Then this isn't a civil matter. It's blackmail and causing a death. The charges are severe. Your client risks spending the rest of her life not at society parties. Luke fell silent, thinking fast. What do you want? He finally asked. It wasn't enough. Their quiet, behind-the-scenes defeat didn't satisfy me. They had staged my public execution. I would return the favor. I didn't just want victory. I wanted revenge. Public revenge. I don't want them to just leave, I said to Sebastian as we got into the car. I want everyone in this city to know the truth. Every single person. Maya, maybe that's not necessary, he began cautiously. You've won. Why stir it up? Because they did it to me publicly, I interrupted. My humiliation was public. My vindication must be public too. I want back not only the perfumery, but my good name. And my father's name. Sebastian looked at me and nodded. He understood. He didn't argue anymore. That very day I started taking action. I placed an announcement in the city's main newspaper in bold letters on the front page. Maya Hayden will make an official statement about the future of Hayden Perfumery. I rented the main hall in City Hall. I personally called everyone who had been at my birthday, all the journalists, officials, and respected citizens. I invited them to an official ceremony for the handover and closure of the enterprise. I knew they would come. Every last one. Curiosity and the hunger for scandal are a powerful force. They would come to witness my final disgrace, my public surrender. And I knew she would come. Olympia. And Edith. They couldn't miss the chance to see me utterly crushed, to savor their last triumph. They didn't know yet that Lazarus had fled. They thought they were leaving together, having just suffered a financial defeat. They would come to cast one final, victorious glance at me. The day of the meeting arrived. The City Hall chamber was packed. The crowd buzzed, whispering, waiting for the spectacle. I stood backstage, peeking through the curtain at their faces. I saw everyone, those who had whispered behind my back in the store, those who crossed the street to avoid me. And I saw them. Olympia and Edith, sitting front and center. Cold, triumphant sneers etched on their faces. They were waiting for my end. I was announced. I walked onto the stage and approached the podium. Silence fell. Hundreds of eyes fixed on me. I saw a mix of pity, contempt, and curiosity. I took a deep breath. The show was beginning. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, I began, my voice surprisingly steady and calm through the microphone. I have gathered you all today to clarify the situation regarding my father Evan Hayden's legacy and to put an end to all rumors and speculation. I saw Olympia and Edith glance at each other, smug smiles spreading across their faces. They thought I was about to start apologizing. Many of you witnessed my personal grief, my public humiliation. Many heard the rumors that I, supposedly through incompetence, brought my father's business to the brink of collapse. Today, I will tell you what really happened. And I began to speak. Calmly, methodically, without emotion, as if reading a formal report. I told them about the prenuptial contract. About the $1 million. About how Lazarus had played his role for 10 years. The hall went still. Then I described how he had systematically bankrupted the perfumery from the inside, the shell company of his mother, and the sabotage during the open house. I saw the color drain from Olympia's and Edith's faces. Smiles vanished. They began to understand that something had gone wrong. But that's not all, I continued, raising my voice. When their plan to seize the business failed, they went to extreme measures, forgery and blackmail. They fabricated a document claiming my mother-in-law became a co-owner of the perfumery building. When my father refused to participate in this farce, they resorted to their final argument, the blackmail that cost him his life. A murmur ran through the audience. Olympia jumped to her feet. "That's a lie," she shouted. "A vile, insane lie. You have no proof, are you sure?" I asked, looking down at her from the stage. I signaled the sound technician. Crystal clear audio blasted through the massive speakers. The recording. My father's voice. And hers. "I'll publish all of this if you don't sell me half of the perfumery building. If you don't agree, I'll destroy you." Olympia froze, mouth open. Her face went paper white. Edith, beside her, seemed about to faint. The entire hall listened, breathless, to the terrifying dialogue. Hundreds of people witnessed the crime firsthand. As the recording continued, a figure rose from the back rows. The city's deputy mayor, a highly respected man. He walked to the stage. All eyes followed him. The sound technician lowered the volume. The official approached the microphone on the side of the stage. "Excuse me for interrupting," he said, in his formal, authoritative voice. "But I must make a statement. 30 minutes ago, based on newly discovered circumstances and submitted evidence, the city prosecutor's office initiated a criminal case against Olympia Blackwood. An investigation is underway under charges of major fraud and extortion. His words dropped into the dead silence of the room like a stone in water. Criminal case. Fraud. Extortion. Those words sounded like a verdict. Then the silence erupted. The hall buzzed like a disturbed beehive. People jumped from their seats, turning toward the front row where Olympia and Edith sat. All eyes were on them. But these were not the looks from before. There was no pity, no curiosity. Only anger. Contempt. Disgust. Olympia stood like a petrified statue. Her face was completely white, her eyes wild. She stared at the stage, the official, at me, seemingly comprehending nothing. Her world, the world of the all-powerful queen of the city, was collapsing before her eyes. Edith collapsed back into her chair, covering her face with her hands. Her whole body trembled. Their friends, the socialites sitting nearby, instinctively moved away from them, as if afraid of catching their shame. One of them even stood up and moved a few rows back. That gesture became a signal. The social execution had begun. People who had fawned over Olympia just yesterday, laughing at her jokes and hanging on her every word, now looked at her as if she were contagious. The whispers turned into a loud, condemning buzz. Killer. She finished off her father. Fraudster. And we thought she was respectable. And that niece of hers? What a snake. They were trapped. Locked in a hall full of people who now hated them. There was nowhere to run. At that moment, Sebastian stepped onto the stage. He approached the podium I had cleared and raised his hand, calling for silence. The murmurs gradually died down. Ladies and gentlemen, he began in his even, impassive voice, in addition to what has already been stated, I am authorized to make a few more declarations. He pulled several documents from his folder. First, Mr. Lazarus Blackwood, son of Ms. Blackwood and former husband of Maya, left the country last night. Before leaving, he withdrew several $1 million from all personal and corporate accounts and disappeared to an unknown location. A criminal case for embezzlement of significant funds has also been initiated. He is now wanted. A collective gasp swept through the hall. Olympia wavered. Her son hadn't just lost, he had fled, robbing her and leaving her to deal with the consequences alone. That blow was worse than anything else. Second, Sebastian continued calmly, holding up the next document. All claims by Ms. Blackwood to any share of the Hayden Perfumery building are declared invalid. The document she referenced is a blatant forgery. Therefore, I officially declare, the sole and full owner of all property belonging to Evan Hayden is his daughter, Maya Hayden. He turned and looked at me. His eyes were warm with approval. I stood on the stage, and the entire hall's eyes were on me. But now their looks had changed: surprise, admiration, respect. And finally, Sebastian said, his voice harder, during the investigation, it was revealed that the family of Ms. Edith Lancaster, he nodded toward Edith, cowering in her chair, was in collusion with the Blackwoods and participated in fraudulent schemes. Their long-standing claims to the land where the perfumery stands were baseless, serving only as a cover for a hostile takeover attempt. Their family legend, that they were wronged, is a lie from start to finish. It was the end for Edith. Her family, who had once flaunted their old name and supposed honor, was now publicly branded as a family of petty fraudsters and liars. Their reputation in the city was destroyed. Permanently. I saw two men enter the hall. They approached the front row and whispered something to Olympia. She rose, moving like a puppet, and followed them to the exit. She walked with her head down, through a gauntlet of contemptuous stares and hissing whispers. Edith remained seated alone in the empty chair, trembling with silent sobs. No one touched her. She was condemned to the worst punishment, a lifetime of shame in a city that now despised her. When the door closed behind Olympia, silence fell over the hall. Then someone, the museum director again, began to clap. This time, the entire hall joined in. It wasn't just applause. It was a standing ovation. People were cheering me. The daughter of her father, who had managed to protect his honor. I stood on the stage, tears running down my cheeks. But these weren't tears of grief, they were tears of relief. Justice had prevailed. Later, when everyone had left and Sebastian and I remained alone in the empty hall, I asked him, "How did you manage to get the expert's conclusion on the forged contract so quickly? You said it would take months." Sebastian looked at me with a sly squint. "I didn't order any expert examination, Maya." "How?" I didn't understand. "But you said." I said the examination would prove it was forged. And I wasn't lying. Only, this exam wasn't conducted by me. It was conducted by your father. I stared at him, bewildered. He pulled another, final sealed envelope from his briefcase. Inside was an official document, the conclusion of the country's top handwriting expert. It stated that Evan Hayden's signature on the contract selling 50% of the building to Olympia Blackwood was a forgery. But how? Where did Dad get this document? The contract just appeared, and therein, Sebastian said, his voice full of genuine admiration, lies Evan's genius. This expert was hired by your father 10 years ago, right after your wedding with Lazarus. He was given samples of your father's signature and Olympia's signature, along with sealed instructions to be delivered to him after your father's death. The instructions said, if a document ever comes for verification claiming I sold the Blackwoods a share in the perfumery building, know it's a forgery. Conduct an examination and deliver the conclusion to my lawyer. I shivered as I listened. He knew, I whispered. He knew they would try exactly this. 10 years ago, he already knew their next move. He knew they would go all the way, Sebastian nodded, and he set a trap for their trap. He left us a ready-made, certified expert's conclusion. All we had to do was fill in the date and the number of the forged contract. That was the evidence I handed to the prosecutor this morning. Your father outplayed them even from the grave. I stood in the empty city hall with Sebastian, and the weight of the past weeks, months, years began to lift. My father. He hadn't just thrown me into the fire. He had given me both a shield and a sword, he just forced me to learn to wield them myself. His whole cruel game had been a lesson. Terrible, painful, but, as it turned out, necessary. The day after the assembly, my world changed. When I left home to go to the factory, neighbors who had once avoided me greeted me first. Their eyes were full of respect. In the shop, the saleswoman who had pretended not to notice me now smiled broadly and tried to let me skip the line. My phone, which had previously been silent or ringing nonstop with calls from journalists, now buzzed constantly. Old friends of my father, partners, even competitors called. They congratulated me, admired my courage, offered help. The story of my birthday and everything that followed had become the city's main news. But now it was no longer a story of my humiliation. It was a legend. The legend of how Maya Hayden, a fragile, pampered housewife, had single-handedly crushed the powerful Blackwood family and reclaimed her honor and inheritance. I was no longer just Maya Hayden. I had become my father's daughter in every sense. I became the head of the perfume house. A respected figure whose opinion mattered in the city. I arrived at the factory. The old masters had returned. They greeted me with applause. Their eyes burned with pride. "Well then, Maya," said the oldest, a gray-haired master perfumer who had worked with my grandfather. "Shall we get to work?" "To work." I nodded. The first thing I did was replace the sign. The old, faded letters of Hayden Perfumery were removed. I hung a new, elegant sign in their place, custom made. Hayden Daughter Perfume House. Daughter was for me and for the future generations I believed would continue our legacy. This was my statement. I wasn't just reviving the old. I was starting something new. Months passed. Olympia, after a long investigation, received a suspended sentence due to age and poor health. But it was worse than prison. She remained in the city, stripped of money and status, living her final days in a small apartment on the outskirts, despised by everyone. Edith and her family sold everything they had and moved to another state, unable to bear the shame. Lazarus was never found. He had disappeared abroad with his stolen millions. But I knew a man like that would never be happy. And I was happy. I worked 12-hour days, but it was a satisfying kind of tiredness. I had found my place. I was no longer just someone's wife or daughter. I was Maya Hayden, head of the perfume house. One day, while sorting through my father's old archives in his countryside office, I came across a yellowed sheet of paper hidden in a book. It was a formula. The secret formula for his signature scent, the one he never managed to release. I brought it to my new, sparkling laboratory. The masters looked at the formula as if it were sacred. "We can recreate it," Maya, the chief perfumer, said, thrilled. "It will be a masterpiece." I studied the complex list of ingredients, the notes my father had scribbled in the margins, and realized I didn't want to simply recreate it. "No," I said. "We won't just recreate it. We'll make it better." I took his formula as a foundation and began adding new notes. Something of my own. Something bolder, more modern, more complex. I worked on this fragrance for weeks, pouring in all my soul, my history, the pain, betrayal, struggle, and triumph. And when it was finished, I knew it was the best thing I had ever created. This was not just my father's scent. This was ours. He had started it, and I had finished it. On the day we unveiled our new flagship perfume at the factory, the entire city gathered again. But this time, it wasn't curious onlookers, it was friends and partners. I stood before them, holding the elegant bottle, speaking about legacy, revival, and the future. My victory was complete, public, and undeniable. The harsh lesson my father had set before me had been learned. I was not broken. I had been reforged in fire. And that, dear friends, is how this story ends. A story of betrayal, of a cruel game set in motion by a father, and of a woman who walked through fire and emerged stronger than steel. You know, when I finish reading stories like this, I always pause and think. I think about how complex the world is, and how differently one can view the actions of people. On one hand, there's Maya's father, Evan Hayden. He acted with shocking cruelty, condemning his own daughter to humiliation and pain. But on the other hand, without his terrifying plan, could Maya have become the woman she turned out to be? Or would she have lived her life in a gilded cage, becoming easy prey for predators like the Blackwoods after his death? So, what do you think, dear listeners? Do the ends justify the means? Can his actions be called the highest form of love and care? Or were they simply unforgivable arrogance and manipulation? And what about Maya herself? She didn't just reclaim what was hers, she delivered a public reckoning to her enemies. And one can understand her. But was it the right choice? Did she need this public vindication, the standing ovation, or would a quiet, legal victory have sufficed? Was it justice she sought, or revenge? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Your life experience is far richer than mine. Please share your reflections in the comments below. Every word, every perspective is invaluable to us. If this story touched your soul, please don't hesitate to hit the like button. For you, it's one click. For our channel, it's immense support and proof that our work matters. And of course, subscribe so you don't miss our new stories, where passions burn just as fiercely. I wish you health, peace in your heart, and only loyal, devoted people around you. Take care of yourself and your loved ones. All the best to you. At the end of this video, a window will appear in the center of the screen. Please click on it. There you'll find more of our most fascinating stories.